Hello, Cardboard Legionnaires. This is Grant Lindenberg coming at you with another edition of Pushing Cardboard. War games, war games, war games. This time I'll be looking at a couple of things in more detail. After last time's double Civil War package, we're back to World War II. The stunning Task Force from Vuca Simulations is a reprint and update of a game originally published in the 1980s, and GMT and Comsim Press have finally released their update to the Russian campaign. They're calling it the Deluxe 5th edition. We'll take a look at what this edition includes rather than how it plays. And as this is one of the best-selling war games of all time, going all the way back to 1974, I'll dispense with giving the actual gameplay a review. So, welcome to the Everything Old is New Again episode. Last episode was hotly anticipated, apparently, as it had the second highest first week downloads I've ever had, and it's the third highest for its first 30 days. But on the other hand, I didn't hear back from as many of you as I usually do, so perhaps you were all too busy playing a greater victory to take the time to write. I can't lie, I missed you, but I'm sure I'll hear from you in the future. Anyway, onwards. News and what I've been playing. For news, I got to participate in the San Diego HistCon Online Spring Offensive recently. I interviewed Brian Train and then hosted a slideshow and commentary by him. The topic was modern urban combat and Brian's design approach to same. It was well received and I managed to record it. It's posted on my YouTube channel, but I can make an audio download for the podcast if anyone's interested. Probably the video is better though, because you'll get to see a slideshow. Anyway, I'll make a link to the video in the show notes for this episode. The convention was a hit. An interesting thing about these online conventions, whereas at a live con, most folks play games and the seminars can be somewhat lightly attended, at online conventions, the seminars are packed and there isn't much actual gameplay. I did play one game at my first online con, but even with Vassal and Tabletop Simulator, I think folks aren't as likely to pair up and play at these online cons. Maybe because it's a little trickier to size someone up when you can't see them. You can't get a good bearing on what kind of a person you're about to spend a couple hours with. Anyway, it was great fun and a big success. GMT has a couple mini conventions coming up. GMT East is happening March 31st to April 2nd. I'm recording this on March 31st and I hope to have it out tonight. So the convention has just started. And then in late April, they will again host their Spring GMT West weekend at the warehouse. I'm excited to say I'll be returning to that, so hit me up and let me know if you're going as well. Also in GMT news, much like what they're doing with Commands and Colors Napoleon that I mentioned last episode, the Combat Commander games are being amalgamated, with Combat Commander Europe and Mediterranean now being in a single product, a single box. And then, of course, tons of other new stuff on their P500 list. Personally, I'll be checking out the new expansion for Fighting Formations that brings in the Americans. Also of note is another game in the Twilight Struggle family, 1848, The Springtime of Nations. And even before the first mini coin quad has arrived, I think that one's called the British Way, they've announced another one, this time on Latin America. So another mini coin quad. Plus, many more. I can't keep up with GMT's output. Over at Compass, there's been a fair bit of buzz about their new game on the Naval War of 1812, as well as Carrier Battle Philippine Sea. I think that's it. And anyway, I have the former now, the 1812 one, and I'm interested in the latter to see. I want to kind of compare that to some of the other carrier games that I've been playing lately. And also, lots of folks are interested in their new game on the Russian Revolution. This looks to be based on Marco Poutret's Prelude to Rebellion, a game whose players rave about, but I don't think it sold well due to the relatively obscure setting pre-Confederation Canada. That's a shame because by all accounts it's a fantastic game and Marco deserves more recognition for that. Revolution Games has a new solo Stalingrad game from Mike Ranella. This is a crushing disappointment, not because the game is poor, but because I'd hate to see Ranella cross over to the dark side and start designing solo games. I have 11 of his non-solo titles, and I hope there are more in the future. I'm playing his Not War But Murder via Vassal PBM right now against another human player, and really enjoying it. I received the shipping notice for the new reworked edition of Kingmaker. I know a lot of people are really excited about this. I'm not sure I'm going to keep it. I know it's going to be terrific. I love the game. I love the idea of a new edition that has rules to clean up the end game and all that. But I just don't play multiplayer games that much, and Kingmaker really isn't great for two people. So I don't know. When it arrives and I have a look at it, maybe I'll go, oh no, this is beautiful, I have to keep it. But I don't know. Maybe I'll find somebody who missed out on the Kickstarter and make their day. By the way, if there's a publisher you like or whom you represent and would like more news about them, hit me up. Let me know who you're interested in. I'll see what I can set up, or have them get a hold of me if you're involved with them. In the meantime, if you're a Discord fan, drop by the Pushing Cardboard server. There's usually someone there talking about a game. There's a link in the show notes and on the website, or drop by the website. I know I keep on banging on about that, but the Discord server has become a good place to hang out, and I always like to see the traffic at the website and comments about the polls and the articles. What's on the table? Okay, well, the big addition this time is A Most Fearful Sacrifice. We've started with the little intro scenario to learn the game and the Vassal module. The module is pretty good, but it has a couple of annoying things. It uses Shift-T and Shift-K as hotkeys, so when you're typing in the chat log, you suddenly pop up a window unexpectedly whenever you hit Shift-T. It's aggravating. I don't think the designer, the module designer, is perhaps not a PBEM player. The module's fairly bare bones, requiring you to have your charts and tables on hand to play. This is an effort to discourage piracy and people not buying the game. I don't think it discourages anyone. I think anybody who is interested in this game, if they can afford it, they're going to buy it. And just because they play it on Vassal isn't going to keep them from buying a game that they would otherwise buy. But I went through this back in the 80s when the record companies were crying about home taping was going to kill music, and they sold more music than ever. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, it's also it's real drag to have a bare bones module. If you like to play using your laptop when you're on the road, you don't, you're going to have to bring all your charts and tables with you. Thankfully, there's at least a PDF of the rule book available, so you don't have to drag that along as well. I was able to hack the module myself to get rid of the shift keys and fix a couple other things, but for a game this big, it deserves a bit more love on its module. I'll say that. In other games, we've started our second historical ASL from Lone Canuck, Crossing the Morrow. I say we've sort of started because every time I think I've finished my setup, my opponent reminds me of another rule that I've missed, and I have to redo and tweak things. Some of it's just me being stupid, but some of it's because not all the rules for the initial scenario are in the same place. We did get as far as his initial bombardment, and it's scary how many units of mine broke and buildings were rubbled. Scary, but exciting. I'm also playing Nevsky still at Rally the Troops. This still just really feels like a good way to learn. Every time the game won't let me do something or offers to let me do something I wasn't aware of, I can just look it up in the rules, and I feel like I'm learning it much more easily than just banging my way through the rule book. And then, of course, I've got a few others as usual. Commands and Colors, Napoleonics, Undaunted. Oh, and Dave and I have fired up Storm Over Arnhem. He hadn't played an Area Impulse game, so we're starting from the beginning of Area Impulse, and he's getting his feet wet that way. And I'm on to another mission in Last 100 Yards Airborne. This is going to be our first mission that has actual airdrop. So my Yanks will enter via Silk on his Germans on a huge board. It should be fun. New games to the collection. Well, first up, I wanted to give a bit of a shout out. I wanted to try ordering from a newer Canadian online store. I think they actually have a real store as well, but it's across the other side of the continent, so that experience will have to wait. But I ordered To Take Washington because I wanted to try a line of battle game, Napoleon's Wheel because I wanted to try a Library of Napoleonic Battles game, and the latest issue of Le Franc Tireur, a third-party ASL magazine from France. All this from Tadenac Games out in Halifax, I believe they're located in. It arrived quickly, perfectly packed. I'll link to it in the notes, so you can check out their online presence as well. Also for ASL, I received the latest official historical module, Drop Zone St. Mère-Église. Still not sure if I will crack the shrink and play it, or just hold on to it till its price skyrockets when MMP doesn't reprint it. It's with ASL stuff, that's always a decision you have to make. Speaking of game stores, the Armchair Dragoons have a semi-regular feature on friendly local game stores. I sent in a few shots of mine, the Sentry Box, and it was a featured store a couple weeks ago. If you've heard of the Sentry Box and want to look inside, again, I'll provide a link in the notes. I also bought a collection of older S&T mags from a local player. In most of them, the game was still unpunched. I think there were 28 issues in all, and it was for a good price. So now I'll never be at a loss for reading or stuck with my desire to try something new. From Compass, I got Enemy Action Kharkov. I never played the one on the Ardennes, so I thought I'd dive in with this one. And also 1812 War on the Great Lakes Frontier. This is an unusual looking game. The maps are the Great Lakes and adjoining rivers with just a bit of the land around them. Even though I think there are land units in the game as well. But anyway, I imagine this will be worth a dive soon. It's an intriguing looking game. And then from a BGG math trade, I received 1918-1919 Storm in the West. It hadn't really been on my radar before, but it's a TED Racer game on World War I, and I managed to trade away something I wasn't playing, so it's a good swap I look forward to checking out. And then, of course, finally I received the latest issue of C3I magazine, including Trevor Bendard's Desert Victory. I've only pushed the counters around solo on this a bit so far, but oh wow, it looks good. I'm dying to play it with someone opposed. Okay, so that's all. That was a fair bit, but way less than last month, so perhaps progress is being made. Books. Just one book to mention. Gettysburg, The Last Invasion by Alan Guelzo. Perfect reading while I was getting ready to play A Most Fearful Sacrifice. The book really stresses the actions of John Reynolds in making the engagement happen. Meade was looking to withdraw, but Reynolds deliberately put himself in a place that made that impossible. Guelzo downplays Chamberlain's accomplishments and slags him a bit for being a bit of a publicity hound after the war, so that's going to disappoint fans of The Killer Angels, and I'm a fan of that book. But I was also happy to note that the author also goes out of his way to show that Longstreet didn't drag his butt on the second day, and that his advice was solid, and that the ultimate mistakes rest with Lee. A good book. It's the only book dedicated just to that battle that I've read, but it felt great. I'd recommend it. All right, so game one. Let's get started with a deep dive. Today we're going to take a look at Task Force: Carrier Battles in the Pacific by Genichiro Suzuki, published by Vuca Simulations. This game was originally published in the 80s, and the designer is now deceased, I think. So this is pretty much a straight reprint, but with a graphic design update, which is a real strong suit of Vuca Simulations. It's a heavy game, but I mean that literally. It's a heavy game. It's a heavy box. There's several maps. All but one of them are mounted. All the player aids and setup cards are mounted as well. The counters are pre-rounded, the type you individually punch out, so not as many, that just means more counter sheets. So it's just a lot of heavy cardboard in this box, but everything about the production values here are first rate. I sort of think of this as a lighter game of another game that was recently reprinted, Pacific War. Well, Pacific War does have a big strategic scenario for playing out the whole war. As I understand it, Mark Herman's design intention with that was more about the battles and smaller engagements. Likewise, Task Force is all about the battles. There's no campaign here, even if you wanted one. But there's 10 scenarios. The first 5 are basically a programmed instruction method to teach you the game. The first, Pearl Harbor, teaches you how to do air attack versus ships. The second scenario, you learn about naval movement and recon. The third teaches naval combat, and then the fourth teaches full-on carrier versus carrier, fleet versus fleet actions. And then we still have the non-teaching scenarios. There's Coral Sea, Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz and Second Guadalcanal, and there's a fictional Indian Ocean raid, and then also a hypothetical big fleet versus fleet battle. So there's a lot of play in the box here. Carriers and all capital ships down to light cruisers have their own name counters. Destroyers and transports are just generic, which I guess also sheds a bit of light on why the box is so heavy. Even ships that only appear once in one battle are here. Anything that sank at Pearl Harbor, there's still a counter for it. So that's a lot of ships. Anyway, so how does it all work? Mostly very simply. Ships have 3 ratings. They have anti-air, a naval firepower, and a durability rating. They're all 2-sided counters, so there's a damage side as well with somewhat reduced ratings. Aircraft have an air-to-air rating as well as range, and an air-to-surface rating for the dive bombers and torpedo bombers. And then they also have a reduced side with basically halved effectiveness on the backside. Combat is very simple in this game. There's 4 combat tables, an anti-air table, an air-to-air table, an air-to-surface table, and a naval battle table. They all work slightly differently from another one, but the genius thing here is that there's almost no die roll modifiers. It's basically, in all cases, just a case of adding up the attack factors and roll on the charts. When you're fighting versus air units, the charts will tell you if you manage to deliver 0, 1, or 2 steps of damage, and whether the air unit can continue on if it's a bomber, or if it's got to head back to base. And most air units can only take they're all just 2-step units, so two hits gets rid of that air unit. Naval hits are a little different. Each ship has a durability rating on its front and back. Destroyers are 1, while battleships are in the 7 to 9 range. So in attacking ships, you'll generate a number of hits. If that number is less than the durability rating, no damage is done. If it's equal to the rating, the ship suffers minor damage, and it's marked with a counter and rolls on a side table to see if the flight deck is damaged if it's a carrier. If the ship takes its durability rating +1 in hits, the ship counter is flipped to its damage side. And then if there's still more hits to assign, a similar process is followed. If you have more hits but not as many as the flip side durability rating, nothing more happens. If you get to equal the flip side durability rating, that causes a critical hit. And then if you go over any number over the durability rating on the flip side, sinks her. So really straightforward, very easy to understand. But I suppose that's getting a bit heavy. So that's sort of the fun stuff before we do all the stuff for how we get there. I mean, how do we even get into combat? Each side has a task force display board, which again mounted, with room for up to 16 task forces, 6 of them carriers and the other 7 just fleet forces. Carrier task forces can have only 1 carrier and up to 4 escorting ships. The game has been criticized in some quarters a bit for this, but you can place 2 task force counters on the map in the same hex, so you still can create larger task forces. The non-carrier task forces can have up to 9 ships. The ship counters themselves, they go on the task force displays, not on the map board. The only thing on the map are the task force counters. Each side also gets a set number of dummy task force markers, dependent on the scenario being played. Beginners play with their task force displays out and visible to both players, but the game's much more nerve-wracking when each player keeps their display hidden, so you don't know what's the exact composition of your enemy's task forces. Night turns are 3 hours long, giving us 2 night turns per day, and then day turns are 90 minutes long, giving us 8 day turns. Each turn starts with a movement phase. Before movement, if 2 or more task forces are in the same hex, then you can shift ships between them or combine it into a single task force. Similarly, a single task force may split into 2 task forces. Task forces may move 2 hexes in night turns and 1 hex in day turns. Who goes first alternates from turn to turn. And of course, the dummy task force markers are also moved. You can't move into a hex containing an enemy task force, even if you suspect it's a dummy. Your dummies can't even be moved adjacent to enemy task forces. After both players are moved, any dummies that are adjacent to a task force, because your opponent moved next to you, any dummies adjacent are removed. And then if any real task forces are adjacent to each other, they're revealed and naval combat is initiated. There's a simple process to determine range, which determines which ships will be able to participate. If I have battleships and you only have destroyers, well, I'm going to get to shoot you, but you're not going to be able to shoot back because I can shoot a whole lot farther than you. And then the simple combat roll for each attack. If carriers or land-based air is in the scenario, it's then time for the aircraft operations phase. With this one, rather than alternating who goes first each turn, in this phase, players roll to see who goes first each time. Each carrier or base will have a selection of fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. Aircraft are always in one of 5 states: reserve, ready, on cap or combat air patrol, raiding, or landing. At the start of the scenario, all units are in reserve. And then in the air ops phase, you can move reserve units to ready units to cap or raid, and landing units back to reserve or ready if they are landing from cap. Well, a carrier may have 6 or more air units. Only 4 can be in the ready box at any one time. So you can see that managing your flight deck becomes a big part of the game. Which types of units to have at the ready, as well as how many fighters to send as escorts on raids versus how many to place on cap. Any air units sent to raid are placed on map on the task force or base that they're raiding. Once each player has done their assignments, the raids are carried out. First, any cap gets to try to intercept the raiders and their escorts. They have to attack escorts first, and then they can attack any raiders. After that's resolved, any raiders that get through then have to face any anti-air, whether from ships or the ground. And then finally, if any raiders remain that haven't been turned back, they get to attack the surface targets. Again, each step is a roll on a chart with generally no DRMs. So after that's all done, all surviving air units of both sides are returned to base, whether it's land or carrier. Then comes the recon phase. This is how you discover which enemy task forces are real and which are dummies. Because you can only attack ones that you've reconned and you know are real, or at least partially know what they are. For each carrier or land base you have, you're going to get 1 or 2 search opportunities. You'll draw chits from a bag and then place them face down on any task forces within 8 hexes of your carrier or base. You don't look at the underside of the chits. Your opponent, he does the same. He doesn't look at the underside of the ones he places on you. This bag of chits is 52 counters with search written on the top side, and then on the bottom it says either lost contact, detected, or misdirect. Once both players have placed their search chits, the owner of each task force looks at the underside of the chit placed on it. If the chit says lost contact, he just says lost contact, no info is revealed. If the chit says detected, then you're going to have to reveal if the task force is real or a dummy, and if real, whether it contains a carrier or not. If the chit says misdirect, you can say lost contact if it's a dummy. If it says misdirect and it's a carrier, then you say fleet sighted. But if it's a ship that's a non-carrier, you say carrier sighted. So you mix it up a little bit. Your opponent won't know because he doesn't know, or they don't know that it's a misdirect chit. The thing here is the player who owns the task force looks at these, and then he places the search chit under the task force chit to provide later verification if necessary. So in this way, both sides' forces are gradually revealed. X's can only be targeted for attack if the task force has been at least partially revealed. You can't attack non-scouted task force markers just to see what's there. So finally, there's an admin phase where you can repair a bit of light damage. You can't repair any critical hits. And then it's on to the next turn. And that's it. There's a few other pieces of Chrome. Full zero error groups can be split into two reduced groups to try and take on more enemies. B-17s are exempt from anti-air attacks. The Yamato, the biggest battleship on the water at the time, has some special attack capabilities. There's a few other things, but just little bits of Chrome, nothing heavy at all. All in all, I found this a really easy game to get into. I zipped through the first 4 learning scenarios in a couple of evenings, and then I was ready to play Coral Sea, the first big carrier battle. Just terrific fun. And with such straightforward tables, I never felt like I was missing a die roll modifier or a rules exception. And I got everything I needed from the player's aid. I didn't feel like, I got to go back to the rule book to look that. So I got to say, if you want to play some naval battles, but GMT's Pacific War seems just a bit too daunting, this is going to be the game for you. It does have a good-looking vassal module with all the scenarios included. Although I have to say it was a bit disappointing to see that although the map and the scenario cards are included in the module, you still have to drag out all the counters for each scenario. It had been much better, I think, to have the counters out and ready for each scenario setup, because in a vassal module, scenarios in a module are basically just a save game file. There's no tricky thing to have the counters sort of ready to go. Well, Vuca games are beautiful. This is my 3rd game from them, and each time I'm just blown away by the quality. I never knock a game for poor art design. For me, the gameplay is always the thing. But boy, that doesn't keep me from appreciating exceptional components. But nice components come at a cost. This game, the retail price is $111 US plus shipping. Now, if you're in the States, you're lucky. It's only 15 euros to the US, which is, I don't know, maybe only $16 or something. I'm in Canada, and it's 30 euros to ship to me, so that's a bit of a bummer. But people get a little worried about ordering games from Germany, but I have to say, you compare this, for example, from I recently ordered 1812 War on the Great Lakes Frontier from Compass. That game cost 99 US, but shipping to me was $46 US. So much more than the 30 euros that I would be charged by Vuca. So, Compass's US shipping is only $2 cheaper than Vuca's. And Vuca's games are coming all the way from Germany. So I guess all that to say is don't let Vuca being overseas put you off. Yes, they're high-end games. Their prices are on the higher side, but that's because there's nothing papery in here. This is big, great components, and their pricing is right in the Compass ballpark. Who sure there might be a more pricey producer in the States, but not unreasonable. These are great games, and they don't cost a fortune to have shipped from overseas. Well, they sort of do to Canada, but they don't if you're in the US. They don't if they're even less in the EU. I think it costs the same to get them shipped to the UK, 15 euros. So yeah, don't let the shipping put you off unless you're in Canada or Africa or somewhere else. Anyway, final word. Great game. I'm going to be taking this with me on my upcoming trip to GMT West. I hope to get a couple scenarios in down there. I've talked to a couple people already who are interested in playing it too. So, recommended. Okay, game number 2. Up next, the latest edition of the Russian campaign, as published by GMT and produced by John Kranz of Consim Press. I did a YouTube video looking at this game, so what you're going to hear is the audio from that video, with most of the references to specific visuals edited out, and anything else that just wouldn't make sense. But other than that, there's no visual really needed here. The video is up on my YouTube channel if you want to see it, as is an unboxing video if you'd like a closer look at the components. But this audio, this will give you my look at the game here, and it's more to let you know what you're getting in this new version. What exactly does it offer to entice you to buy another copy or a first copy of this game? So here's my look at the latest publication of the Russian campaign. Today we're going to take a look at a game that's at once an old classic and brand new. We're having a look at the latest version of the Russian campaign. This just came out from GMT. They're calling this the 5th edition, the fifth edition, Deluxe edition. This game, if you're a regular wargamer, you've probably played it in your history or know a bit about it. But it's gone through many versions. It first came out, I think, in about '74 from a little company called Jedco, and there was 2 editions from Jedco, and then Avalon Hill picked it up and put out what I guess we're calling the 3rd edition. But I think that the Avalon Hill version itself might have went through like 3 editions of its rule set as well. And then it was out of print for a while, and L2 Design Group picked it up and made a 4th edition, and they enhanced it and with more premium components and whatnot. And now GMT has picked up the mantle and put out a 5th edition and incorporated some of the things that L2 Group did as well. I should note that there is sort of a side branch as well. This year, Compass Games also came out with a version, but as far as I know, their version of the Russian campaign is a strict remake of one of the 2 Jedco versions. I imagine the 2nd edition of the Jedco. So this new version is based mostly on the Avalon Hill, but takes some of the things that they learned from the L2 Design Group version, as I understand it. And it gives you a whole bunch of optionals, and it kind of takes everything that's been learned over the last, 40 years or whatever it's been of play of this game, and tried to tighten it up without drastically changing the rules, hardly changing the rules at all, really, but a couple of small changes. And then also providing counters for optional things that have been proposed along the years, both in the Avalon Hill General Magazine or in other magazines like Fire and Movement or Moves or magazines like that. This game's got a long history. It came out way back when. I think the Avalon Hill version was 1976, and it's one of those games like Victory in the Pacific where it's still being played at tournaments today. If you go to the World Board Game Championships, you'll probably see Victory in the Pacific. If you go to any of those big wargaming tournaments, you'll probably see somebody having a go at the Russian campaign. So this isn't going to be really a review of the game itself. This game's been around for, like I said, 40 years or more, I guess, and it's stood the test of time. If you're interested, there's no shortage of strategy and analysis articles in old issues of the General and what have you. Those can be found online in PDF form for free. I'll put a link in the notes about where to find those if I can rustle it up. But I don't think there's any need for me to give a review of how this game works or whether it's any good or not. I think it's stood the test of time, and those that like it love it, and those that don't, well, they've already passed it by. It's just briefly, I'll say it's a classic hex encounters game set on the East Front, the whole of the East Front. It's got a combat, it's a CRT, odds-based CRT. It's going to be familiar to most people who've been in the hobby for a while. It's one of those games. I don't think it was the first one to do it, where you get move, combat, and then the armor has an exploitation movement. I think it's one of those type of East Front games. Anyway, it's been around forever. People love it. It's not a perfect representation of the East Front by any means, but it was the best we had at the time, and as a game, it's simply outstanding. So that's all I want to say up front. Now I'll go over a few of the things that make this version the Deluxe 5th edition that it is. Okay, the first thing that we notice about the new version is the enlarged map. This is half the map. The map comes in two sections, 22 by 34 each, and they would fit on my table actually this way, but my table is not wide enough. It makes I guess a 32 by 44 inch map in total, but I don't I don't have room for that. The hexes they're 1 inch hexes, which is much bigger than the original map. And if you remember the old map, I don't have a copy of mine anymore. Mine got mildewed somewhere along the way, and I had to get rid of it. But the old one was a much paler map. It was almost sort of a white color. I guess it looked more wintry in that way. But this one has more color, a little more detail, but still very clear, very clean, very easy to see what's going on. As well, you can see across the top, we've got the replacement pool, off map units box, weather box, surrendered units, etc. The turn record track there, Baltic Sea, Gulf of Finland movement chart, air power availability chart. The bottom section of the map also has holding boxes and whatnot as well. So yeah, right away we can see that it's a much improved map. I have the paper version, but it also available at a little extra charge. You can get a mounted map of the whole thing as well. So that's the first thing you notice. I think the second big thing in terms of components is, of course, the counters are, instead of the original half-inch counters that came in the original game, now we have 5/8 inch counters. And you can see, I was going to start clipping these, but there's hardly anything in terms of like corner nibs. These counters popped out so easily. I may go without clipping because they're just so sort of perfect as is. You can also see, printing has come a long way since, this 1976, 1980, when these games were, when I got my first version of this game. And you can see how much closer to the edge of the counters we can print now without being offset, or, so the typeface can be larger, the images can be larger. So in addition to the counters being larger, everything is larger and more readable. The counters are great. Okay, in addition to the updated components, there's a few extra components and whatnot included in the game as well. There's a section starting in Section 26 of the rulebook. There's a section of optional rules, and I think most of these rules appeared in previous versions of the game, either the original Jedco, the Avalon Hill, or the L2 version that is kind of known as version 4 now. This game is now being known as version 5. And then there's this Section 28, which has bonus material, which includes some new variant ideas, sort of optional rules as well, that came out in different publications during the game's history. So I'm just going to go through a few of these and let you know what's involved. In the optionals, there's a rule for SS replenishment that just gives the SS units that are priority over replenishment. So it's an optional rule that favors the Germans a little bit. A lot of these optional rules are going to tilt the balance one way or the other. There's an optional rule on industrial evacuation, which gives the Russians the chance to pull some of their industry back, I think, back towards the east at the expense of increasing their rail capacity. I think that's what the trade-off is there. That's one of those rules that you use in the campaign game only. Obviously, it's not for the shorter scenarios. There's a historical weather chart instead of rolling for the weather. I think that's been around since the beginning. But then this is an interesting one from the original, not the original Jedco, the Jedco second edition game. This is battle groups. This gives you a chance, instead of completely eliminating certain units, they are replaced by these smaller battle groups. So starting in 1942, Russian guards, German armor, motorized infantry, or SS units, whenever they're eliminated in EX, D1, or Defender eliminated results, their remnants, hereafter known as battle groups, survive if able to retreat. So there's a full list of rules for the battle groups there. And then there's the next section is on artillery. it allows you to, instead of bringing in some replacement units, you can bring in extra artillery instead. That's an optional rule as well. Does add a little bit of a little bit of extra complexity, but it's not bad. There's an optional rule on national restrictions about where Finnish units can go. Also, Italy, Hungary, and Romania. Restrictions on where they can go, an optional rule for that. Optional rules on historical naval restrictions, and a rule for bidding for sides. If both players kind of know what they're doing and have a feel for balance in the game, it's just a rule for how to bid for sides. Pretty easy. An optional rule for fortress cities. This is an optional rule to either side can use this to make a decision to like really defend particular cities, and they become harder to capture. A rule for strategic movement for units that are far from the front. A rule for Hungarian neutrality and Romanian logistics. This keeps Hungary out of the beginning of the game, I think, for just a little bit. I think that's the basics of that one. An optional rule for Russian recovery. This has to do with Russian increase in recruitment as the battle went on, as the war went on. An optional rule for Russian artillery barrage. This is again from the second edition Jedko. And this it includes these artillery barrage counters, and they're available in the update or in the extra counters as well. There's an optional rule for optional worker units that gives you a couple more counters as well, and it ties in with the bidding system, and so that's how you get some extra workers. And I think that's it for optional rules. Oh no, there's a couple more. Feeding the beast replacement accumulation. This is just a rule to prevent sort of gamey strategies where the Axis player tries not to cause too many Russian casualties so that the Russians don't get enough replacement units. So it's a alternative rule just to deal with a little bit of a gamey situation. Mobile leaders, if you remember the Hitler and the Stalin counters in the original game are 1-0, 1-0, and this makes them movable, which makes them much more vulnerable, but you're able to use them more. And then Lvov Hills adjustment. This is been a contested or a much discussed piece of terrain feature. This is these hills. These hills right here. A lot of people have said, well, there aren't any hills or mountains right there, and that should all be open terrain. So they give you the option to do that. They give you a little overlay that turns those into clear hexes, with the dire warning that it makes this section, makes it much easier for the Axis to sweep through this area. Those mountains were a real in the way the game's normally been played. They were a key part of the defense on this part of the map. So, but anyway, it gives you the opportunity to use the map as it was, or use the map as some folks think it should be. Then we have then the book has a few scenarios. I think there's maybe more scenarios than in the original, but I'm not sure. But anyway, on to the bonus material. There's some interesting stuff here because these came from different places. There's a revised historical setup that gives you that uses the little terrain insert as well, and changes the setup a little bit. There's a variant for Hitler is no retreat rules, which hamstrings the Germans a little bit. Then there's an article in Moves magazine, issue 79 from 1994, and they had a whole bunch of variants that added quite a few different ideas and counters to the game. So there was a couple of counters for 2 German flak corps. There was the OKH Corps and Vistula Corps, so a couple of HQs there. There was the 38th Panzer Corps, the 3rd and 4th SS Panzer Corps. Then we have the 8th, 10th, and 11th Guards Armies. These are Actually, they were actually around in real life, but apparently they were not in the original game, just for play balance reasons, I think. So these work as replacements. We have the 12th SS Corps, a little single counter variant depicting the units, or a single unit for the Warsaw Uprising. It's a little 2-0 unit that can never be moved out of Warsaw. And then some more variants here. There was an article in General Magazine that added some artillery units to the game, some new sea transport rules, and then there was some different, they call them alternative strategic scenarios, and there's a few counters for these as well, depending on the scenario. There's one called the Mediterranean distraction, where Hitler doesn't invade the Balkans, and there's a couple of extra counters in that one. There's something called the Russian reaction, where Stalin decides whether to bring the Siberian army west to defend against the Germans, and I don't think it has any extra counters. There's the Italian sellout, where Hitler decides not to send the Africa Corps to bolster Mussolini's feeble war effort. So Italy withdraws from the war, and the British commit their forces to Roundup instead of to the desert. So we have a different counter available there, and then something called Japanese Gambit, and all this. You can decide how you're going to play these. There's a sort of an option flow chart here where if you use this option or you don't use this option, it tells what you can or can't do in terms of all these different options. So that's a bunch of sort of larger strategic things that are kind of what if scenarios that twist the game a bit. But for people who play the game a lot, I think there'd be some fun in those. Then this was from, I guess, Battle Plan Magazine #1. This was an interesting, this is a sort of like large random events. The German and the Russian each draw a chit numbered 1 to 6, and there's 6 different events for each side that make a fairly decent difference to the way the game plays, but they're kept secret. You don't have to show you don't have to show which one you have until certain conditions are met, and then you have to play it. So for those that like random events in their games, that's a big switch. And and then finally, the last thing probably to mention is they've added these optional Bulgarian forces. It's just 4 units, and it says they were added to the counter mix because there was available space on the counter sheet, but there's no written rules for these. So I guess that's for you to figure out what you want to do. So yeah, that's all the big changes in terms of what they did. They mention in the developer notes here that they tried not to make a lot. They updated the graphics, they updated the counters. They tried to make the rules, in terms of rules enhancements, they tried to just clarify things. They made very few rules additions, just a couple of tiny things. I guess the biggest thing is, just like so many of, apparently, the rail rules keep changing from version to version, and I think this version sticks with the rail rules that were in the L2 version, but with a few pieces of clarification. But I think that's about it. Oh, and one other thing I should also mention in terms of the counters, the basic set, the counters are NATO symbols, very familiar NATO symbols, but they also come with a complete, for those that don't want to use NATO symbols for the armored units, it also comes with a complete set of armor silhouette counters just to swap out your armored units, which is kind of sweet for folks who like those armored silhouettes and kind of guessing what the tanks are silhouetted there. So that's it for all the big changes in this version of the Russian campaign. The only other thing I'll say is I really like the fact that they reused some of Roger McGowan's counter art from the Avalon Hill version, but I have to say I'm a little disappointed that they changed the font here. And they also, if you look on the map uses a font that looks more like maybe the Jedco version, or yeah, just I don't know. I love the typeface that they used on the Avalon Hill version. So I guess a part of me wishes they would have used that. At least they repurposed the cover art. And if you look inside, you'll see the insert uses a black and white version of some of that artwork as well. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want a closer look at the components, I also did an unboxing. I'll link that as well in the show notes. Okay, that turned out all right, I think. As I mentioned earlier, the videos are available if you want a closer look. Notes in the comments. Bouquets this week. I'd like to give a shout out to Brian Train. I can't imagine a better interview guest. Harold Buchanan wanted him for a slot at the San Diego Online Convention and asked me to host and interview him. I'll admit I was a little starstruck. I'm a big fan of Brian's work. So I came up with some things I wanted to discuss and questions related to his work that were also related to the theme of the discussion. Brian liked the questions, and then he also said just casually, how about I also do a slideshow and talk about 8 games related to modern urban combat? My work was done. What a super prepared guest. In the actual event, I did get all my questions and comments in, and Brian's slide presentation and talk was fantastic. And we therefore spent about 120 minutes instead of 60, but it was well worth it. So shout out to Brian Train for being the best prepared interview guest I can imagine. Parting shots this week, no bugbears this time. I'm just going to take a moment to say how excited I am to be going back to GMT West. I've already got a few games lined up to play as well. Steve Carey is going to be there with a prototype of his next Blind Swords game. I think it's on Shiloh. I'm going to definitely check that out, give it a playtest play. If you're at the convention, please say hello hit me up ahead of time. Maybe we can schedule a game together. Who knows? I'll also be taking my recording gear. There's likely to be some folks that I'd love to chat with and get them into a future episode. So that's it for me, Grant Lindenberg, and another episode of Pushing Cardboard. Please stop by the website at pushingcardboard.com. It's always great to hear from you. Register and have a say in our polls and in our forums, or comment anonymously in our comment sections if you'd prefer. Or drop by our Discord server. You can find a link to it on our website or probably through Discord search. There's usually somebody talking about war games there. Thanks for listening. If you're the type to give ratings on iTunes, please rate and comment on the podcast. They tell me it helps new folks find us. Until next time, keep your head down.